I'm Mychal. I am a sommelier, tarot reader, and former ballerina.
I'm Suzanne. I am a writer, an author, and a teacher.
And this is Herstory for H. First, we'd like to always remind you that All the Woo is a safe, non-judgmental space where we are just simply sharing our experiences and our insight and knowledge that we have gained over time and really just bringing you in. At the very least, we just want it to be entertaining. All right, so for our wine pairing for Herstory, I am suggesting the Simi Cabernet, and my reason for this is because, well, first of all, I wanted to incorporate a larger red because I know they have a lot of like white wines and things. I mean, it's refreshing and delicious, but just to give a little bit of variety. But also that this is a historic option intentionally. So Ann Graf was the first female winemaker in California modern history. And also she is the first woman to earn an enology degree in fermentation sciences, graduating from the University of California, Davis in 1965. And she was the first woman to serve on the board of directors of the American Society of Enology and Viticulture. She was also the winemaker for Simi. There we are, full circle, why we're enjoying this wine. Okay, Suzanne. Herstory.
Herstory.
Why is this woo?
That's an excellent question, and I am happy to give you responses. So I think probably the underlying reason of why it's woo is because women were largely denied the normal channels of power and authority and autonomy. And so by definition, they had to turn to an invisible world.
Okay.
And so you can see this in multiple queens. I'm just going to rattle them off. And we know more about queens than we know about anybody else, really.
True. More documentation.
Absolutely. Or lies, it goes both ways.
Yeah.
So in the reigns of Mary and Elizabeth, alchemy and astrology were huge. As a matter of fact, it was illegal to know the queen's birth date, to have a piece of paper with her name on it, because it was believed that magic, including combinations of like the divine triangle and that sort of controlling magic, could be used. If you look at like Isabella, Ferdinand and Isabella, Spain. Why they were woo is the whole drive of creating the Iberian Empire was because they were trying to find, in many cases, Prester John, who was supposed to have his own Christian country somewhere in Africa. And when they couldn't find it in Africa, they were like, well, maybe it's somewhere in, the Indies. But the whole thing of to turn the world into solely Catholic world, because for the most part, all of these, especially during the Renaissance Christian eras, believed that when you were getting to the century mark, so the 1500s, the 1400s, the 1600s, that the world was going to, by definition, end. And then however it ended was going to decide who was going to rule. So if you had a whole world that was Catholic, then that meant it was going to be a Catholic heaven.
So are you referring, or are you saying that we are focusing on the woo-woo elements of history through the lens of the female in? Okay, that's how we're focusing.
That's how we're focusing.
Okay, gotcha.
And some non-Western, or at least non-Christian examples would be Cleopatra. She used woo in the form of brilliant storytelling because she equated her relationships with Caesar and with Mark Antony and with the people themselves as being what we would consider woo, but as spiritual relationships, as being gods come to the earth. And for people who were largely illiterate and would just hear stories of what was going on, she was communicating through using those archetypes and that symbolic language. And that's kind of magic.
I mean, I'm all down with us focusing on Egypt because I know we're going to talk about it more, but it also makes me think of, wasn't there an English queen that was referred to in history as being potentially a witch herself? I think it was...
Anne Boleyn was certainly accused at the end, who was Elizabeth I's mother, of being a witch because she had a misplaced mole. They needed to get rid of her. But also...
A misplaced mole. It just wandered.
Just
wandered away.
Just Henry loved it, and then he was freaked out about it. But the idea being that she had used covert means to get him.
Her womanly wilds, if you will.
But not beyond her womanly wiles. That she had used her womanly wiles on many people, like how that woman had time to do anything else other than sleep around after, they read the list of her potential lovers.
Where did she find the time? We don't know.
Seriously.
We don't know.
How did she escape that many people who were watching her? Never mind. But that it couldn't have been except by satanic means that she so enraptured the king and made him turn away from his quote-unquote true wife, who was long gone by then, so they could say that and not have her be like, hey, I haven't gone anywhere.
Yes.
So,
I mean, she never put down the title ever. She refused to from all that going on. That's for sure.
And then again, back to Egypt,
yes.
But way pre all of this Western ideology is Hatshepsut, who, as I know you know, because we're both kind of crush on Hatshepsut.
Crush on Egypt in general.
20 years of peace and prosperity. But she also used that incredible sort of PR of symbolism and storytelling, both just verbally in stories that were passed around, but also in art, to equate herself as first the daughter of the god and then the son of the god.
Propaganda.
Woo.
Magic propaganda. Yes.
Yeah, I think in many cases, if we look at it that way, these women were using maybe not as we would consider
psychology.
Yes, magical, yes. But they were using psychology, and they were using all of the tools that were basically allowed them, mostly because men just didn't recognize them.
You listeners cannot see that. I'm sitting here just shaking my head yes. I realize it's not a visual medium.
She meant nodding her head yes, because we're not actually in Greece.
Yes.
But yes, so that is one of the ways that I think her story of history is so woo, because these women were using all of these other tools and insights and technologies and then straight up magic.
Yeah, they were taking what had been utilized as far as methods were concerned from male rulers, but then also utilizing other alternative methods that they understood.
And they also, in most cases, could not be seen to adopt male behavior. That would have been...
Yeah, we don't want that. We don't want that to happen.
And they had to be seen as being pliable. I mean, the complicated games that all of these women had to play to hold on to their thrones and, keep their advisors from usurping them, keep their people happy. And I think one of the other things to really pay attention to is these women all had reigns, with the exception of Mary, of peace.
True.
And prosperity. They were, if they had been men, they would be considered some of the greatest rulers who ever lived. I mean, so Elizabeth obviously is.
Mary as in Elizabeth's sister, or Mary as in the Queen of Scots?
I'm referring to Bloody Mary, Elizabeth's sister.
Okay. Just clarifying.
I know. There were a whole lot of Marys running around.
There's a lot of Marys. It's a popular name.
I think the other really significant thing in looking at these women in particular through the lens of woo and history is how pivotal their reigns, were in the history of the world. So you had Cleopatra, who was there.
Everybody knows the story.
Everybody knows the story, but maybe doesn't realize that was like the fulcrum between the East and the West, which one was going to have ascendancy.
Yeah.
And you look at Isabella and Ferdinand, and again, a huge fulcrum on the whole age of discovery.
So where would you say Hatshepsut fell into that?
she definitely had her own element of discovery, but if you look at who came behind her, the Napoleon of Egypt, Thutmosis III, then again, when Egypt sort of rebranded itself as almost a military power, which was strange for a country that didn't want to own anything except Egypt.
Right, true.
And,
She gave a motivation.
Or the Dowager Empress of China. I know her name because it's Shuxi, which is very close to Susie, which is very close to Suzanne.
Yes.
Yeah, it made it easy to remember.
You have an affinity for...
I do. Who, her reign ended. I mean, you had the Boxer Rebellion and you had the rebellion of 1911, but that was the end of 4,000 years of Chinese monarchy.
Mm-hmm.
So, these are, and obviously Elizabeth, her reign was the flowering of English culture for sure, which became in many ways worldwide culture because I think everybody, I can't be positive, but I think everybody at least has a respect for Shakespeare, but significantly after that, James I, he was the biggest witch hunter in all of English history.
Yeah, I think that that's something that a majority of people kind of think about, that it's more common that people associated witches and witchcraft to women and not so much to men, although there were some men that were involved. But I don't think that the number was nearly as high as in comparison to.
No, numbers-wise, not at all. But women were a lot easier to go after. True. Because they had no power, and most of the women who were accused of witchcraft were not attached to a man to be protected.
Or were healers of some kind and just had an understanding of,
But again, not attached to a man, probably not attached to property or under the allegiance of somebody. Yeah. So in addition to these women having amazing reigns, in the course of history, they were pivotal points. Backlash in most cases.
Yeah.
But pivotal points.
Okay, so I'm somehow going to mold this into something that I really enjoy talking about.
Isn't that what a podcast is for?
Just selfishly move this into the Egypt side of things. Although, for those of you who don't know, which I would imagine majority of you do not know this about me, I also am a massive fan of the Tudor era of English herstory. For sure, I nerd out on that 100%. But since we have not as many options to go Egypt direction, I'm just going to be...
Although we are going to take a poll. How many of you want an entire season of Egypt?
I mean, I'm voting for that. I think that I have two hands, so that counts as 2 votes, I'm pretty sure.
If we count all the aliens' little toys sitting around us.
Which we have quite a few, yes.
Michael has a collection.
I do. But, I mean, Egypt did have a number of female rulers outside of just the 2 that we're mentioning now.
Absolutely.
They're just not as noted at all, nor did I think any of them really take on that masculine role in the same way that Hatshepsut did.
They were queens.
Yes, for sure. I think that also...
But I think being a queen because you were emulating Isis inherently came with all kinds of woo. I mean, you were already going to be one of the high priestesses of Isis. You were already going to be, participating in the temple rituals. You were already woo.
It seems, though, it's kind of sad when you look at it, though, like Hatshepsut, who really took on a masculine role in order to rule successfully in the way that she did for as long as she did. And also, not just for Egypt, but I think a lot of other queens who have taken on that role, like Elizabeth I, that it seems like so many of them had to kind of put down or set aside some of their femininity in some ways and take on a more masculine role in order to have people work with them, which seems like a shame.
And I think at least, my theory in the case of Elizabeth was she had seen so many women die
Oh, yeah.
as soon as, but not only, Henry's wives and her own mother, but how many people died in childbirth, how many people, and as soon as you married, you lost everything.
Yeah, you had no ownership to anything.
So, she saw marry Philip II, and for a split second in English history, he was the King of England.
Yeah, and he really pushed her aside. Like, it was kind of sad, actually, how he treated her. She was so in love with him. So in love with him. And he was just kind of like, yeah, you're not like...
I have to go to Amsterdam to see my dad.
Yeah.
Or whatever. I don't think it was Amsterdam. Anyway.
I have to go to another country.
Yeah.
Yeah. Get far away from you for a little bit.
You're pregnant? Great. Glad.
Awesome. I did
Not
my
sure
job.
how that happened, but okay, sure. But I think that they knew they had seen enough power struggles to know that children become enemies in the wrong hands, and by virtue of, Elizabeth in particular was kind of sickly. I think she probably suffered from tremendous sort of stress dysfunctions and migraines and all that kind of stuff. The number of times that she was like, I'm not able to come, I can't do that thing. I'm
trying to remember, do we know her sun sign? It seems like she's a Virgo.
And the interesting thing, so I referred a minute ago to it was illegal to have.
Right.
I don't know exactly how I know this. There's been a lot of research. There's also some other arguments of things, how I could know things. But if you were a ruler, you deliberately lied about your birth date.
Right.
So that someone couldn't use it in magic. And I think that probably goes back 1,000 years, if not more.
Right.
Because if someone could look at that information, then they could know how to manipulate you or mistreat you or trigger your karma or whatever.
I'm going to say, though, she probably had Virgo very heavily in her chart.
The Virgin Queen.
Yes, all the things. Like, she is the sign with all of the mental element with stomach issues, nervous issues, anxiety, right? All of those.
Could be. I want to say that her birthday historically was in May, but also that could be, well, we do have history that says, the bells rang out at this time to announce the birth of the baby.
Right.
It was also not uncommon to pleat, if you will, a monarch's birthday with a country's seasons or something like that. So, spring, Easter, everything coming back to life. Gloriana, yeah.
Okay, so that's what I'm voting for that.
She's really a Virgo, and she pretended to be
exactly
a Gemini.
Yeah,
okay.
That's right. That's what I'm going for. Or she had Virgo rising and a Virgo moon and maybe a Virgo Mercury. Who knows? Yeah.
So while history itself may not be woo, if you look at it, I think you can see that woo is riddled all the way through it. So what do we got next week?
Join us next time for our next episode, which will be Intuition on All the Woo.
A to Z.